what happens when you don't ask why and you just take it at face value. Um, I think what happens, let me give you a simple example. So clients are always sending me things they see on the internet. They see in social media. Hey, what about this tax savings idea? What about this tax saving idea? And I just go, well, so, okay. Why would you think that would work? I mean, I'll give you a simple example. So there's this, thing out in the internet right now about if you put your business into a trust, you don't have to pay tax on it.
Yes. Yep. Seen that.
You've probably seen that, right? I'm going, okay. On its face, that's actually true. The trust has to pay tax on it, not you, but the trust has a higher tax rate than you do. So why would you do that? Why would you actually put your income into a higher tax bracket voluntarily by putting it into a trust? It makes no sense. And and I'm like, seriously, so the client brings me this and I said, let's get on call with the attorney. If I don't know everything, maybe he's right.
Mm-hmm.
And this attorney starts explaining it to me. And I said, and he shows me the code section. I said, I don't understand. That's not what this code section's about. This code section's about, it's not about X, it's about Y. I said, help me understand, why you think it's about X. And he kind of goes, well, because this is what it says. And I said, but that's not the purpose of the code section. Did you read the first part of the code section? Do you understand what this code section is doing and the whole purpose of it? Well, and like literally 10 minutes into it, my client is a good friend of mine. He goes, we're just going to stop here. We're done. And he called me afterwards and he goes, I could tell you are not going to get anywhere with that guy because he didn't know what he was talking about. I said, that's right. Because he didn't understand why he was doing what he's doing. He looked at something and say, hey, this looks like a loophole. I'm going, really? You think the IRS, you really think the IRS is that stupid that they wouldn't have thought of that in writing that, when that code section was written, and they wouldn't have, dealt with that. That's the challenge, is that we see something, we go, oh, we might trust the person. We might, they might have a big name or whatever. And we go, wow, that's great. But I'll tell you why there's a reason why Rich Dad, Poor Dad is the best-selling financial book of all time. I mean, like 50 million copies or something. And the reason is because it makes sense. He's actually going, okay, you go, oh yeah, I get that. I get that. There's actually another way to look at it. I don't have to just, go to school, get a job and invest in a 401k. I can actually do something different. There's an alternative to this. There's business, there's real estate, there's energy, there's all these other things that I could be doing. And that's why when I travel with Robert, everywhere we go, I mean, literally we're in Kazakhstan. Okay. Most people don't know where Kazakhstan is, right? So we're in Kazakhstan. Robert wanted to walk up the street from the hotel because he'd seen a billboard that had his picture on it. And he thought that was pretty cool to have a billboard, of himself in Kazakhstan. So we walk up the street. We probably walked a total of 2 blocks. He was stopped 4 times by Kazakhstanis. Kazakhs, I don't know what the term is, but by people who stopped him to tell him how he changed their life in Kazakhstan.
Wow.
We're in Romania and he walks into his hotel. He could not get into his hotel from the car to the hotel without being stopped twice. And I think the reason is because that story is so powerful that it reaches to our heart and we go, oh, I get this. This makes sense to me. And so you can start asking why. So for example, I ask Robert why all the time. So Robert and I talk all the time, and literally like several times a week. And I remember that the first rule of Rich Dad Poor Dad is the rich don't work for money. I said, I don't get it. What do you mean the rich don't work for money? They work for free? And I'm just going, and I literally had to study. I studied with him for 5 years before I understood, oh, the rich work for the asset and the asset produces the income. Don't work for the money, work for the asset. So build the asset, buy the asset, have the asset, you know, produce the income for you. It's like
Yeah.
Rich Dad Poor Dad, right? The book. I mean, it produces millions of dollars of income, and it's the asset that produces the income. He didn't write Rich Dad Poor Dad as a ghostwriter for somebody else. That would be working for money.
Yes.
He wrote to get the asset. And so I had to keep asking why, because I honestly, I had a hard time with that concept. And I finally got it. Once I got it, I'm going, oh, I get it. The rich work for assets. Then I could go to the next piece was, okay, well, geez, so what's the purpose of an asset? Well, the purpose of an asset is to produce income over and over and over again. That's the purpose of an asset. Then I thought, what's the purpose of a liability? Okay, if that's the purpose of an asset, Robert's always saying, well, you need to use liabilities to buy your assets, right? I'm going, well, what's the purpose of liability? I'm going, oh, the purpose of a liability is to buy an asset. And it finally occurred to me, I'm going, well, then what that means is that if we're afraid of debt, it means we don't trust the asset to produce the income. Because if the asset were reliably producing the income, we'd want all the debt in the world because it would produce more income. So it's these relationships. Once you get into the why, you can start seeing the relationships and the patterns. But until you understand why, you'll never see relationships or patterns.
I have so many following questions to that, and you can call it chef's choice here. I'm curious in terms of how you actually got to be Robert's CPA.
It's a great story, actually.
Okay, we'll go there then, and then I'll come back to the your whying and obviously Robert's sort of ability to logically put into people's brains to question their current status. But go ahead.
I started my firm in 1995. And I started by myself. I actually started from scratch. I had 2 clients. I went out. Hey, I'd been a Mormon missionary in Paris. I could knock on doors. I could talk to people. I was not afraid of being told no. And I got a lot of no's. But 9 months, I doubled my business. I had 4 clients.
That's amazing.
So I almost hung it up, but I just decided, you know what? Being the freedom of entrepreneurship is worth it, even if I'm making $30,000 the rest of my life. I don't care. I just could not go back to a job. And Robert, by the way, says job stands for just over broke. I started the firm, and as soon as I moved out of my home office, so this is a key for all those of you working in your home office. Back then, if you had a home office, people thought you were just in between jobs. They didn't think you were serious. You had to have a real office. Okay. You know, kind of like Elon Musk thinks you're not serious about working unless you actually come into the office. So what I did was I rented an office from a friend of mine who was an insurance agent. He had a spare office. He said, come join me. I'll charge like $250 a month. I said, okay. And it was just extra money to him because he didn't need the space. And so I did that. And then all of a sudden, everybody started referring me clients, right? The attorney and they started referring me client. Well, within a year, I'm like overwhelmed. And cause I bought a small practice, plus I'm getting all these referrals. And so I brought in a partner, a buddy of mine that I'd worked with at one of the big 4 accounting firms. Actually worked up both the big 4 accounting firms that I worked at. I brought him in, and we did pretty well. We built the firm. We actually merged with another firm even within a couple of years. But then a day came and he forgot our deal. And because part of the deal on the upfront was I had some existing clients and there were some contingent fees, meaning I was going to get paid, but only if we were successful. And he didn't want to contribute to that. And so, cause I'm not just going to give them the money, right? I mean, you don't just get half of my income. You have to actually pay for it. They didn't want to do that. So, the deal is that if it did succeed, we'd figure out my hourly rate would go to the firm, but the rest of it would come to me. Well, so we get this big check in the mail. This is like 4 years after we're partners for 4 years. We get this big check in the mail. I know what happens if you get a big check in the mail and you put it in the account, into the business account, and you don't take it right out, it will just get spent, right? It's just going to it's just going to go, right? You know how that goes, especially when
Oh
you
yeah.
have 3 other partners. And so I immediately took it right back out. He came storming into my office and he was furious and he was screaming at the top of his lungs, "You are the most dishonest person I've ever met. Never asked a question. Why'd you do it?" Instead, jumped to the conclusion that I'd just stolen $50,000 from the business. And I turned to him, I said, "First of all, this was our agreement. Second of all, we're done." He goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "We're done. We're going to terminate this partnership right now." Said, "This is not acceptable." And so the next few months, we went through the termination process, terminating that partnership.
Yep.
Not a pleasant experience. If you've ever broken up with a partner that was difficult, it's way easier to break up with a spouse in my experience than it's to break up with a business partner. And so we broke up. Well, what happened was we had 10 employees and half of the clients went with him. All the employees stayed with me.
Well, that's a leading indicator.
Tells you a little something about, it wasn't just this one incident, right? It's just that this was the incident that put it over the edge. And so I had a manager, young woman, and super smart. I mean, still to this day, the smartest person I've ever met. And I said, "Well, why don't you join and become my partner?" She says, "Okay, I'd like to do that." She'd been 4 years with with one of the big 4 accounting firms, KPMG, and a couple of years with me. And she was like 26 years old. I said, "I want you to be my partner." She says, "Okay, we're going to be 50-50 partners." I'm going, "Wow, that is bold." I'm going, what do I say to that boldness? And I said, "Okay, under these parameters." So we figured it out. And we had to make a decision right away. We go, do we fire half of the staff or do we go get more business? I think we had to just get more business. I said, "It's too hard to develop staff and we have good staff." She goes, "I agree." So I'm looking in the mail literally the next day and there's a postcard that says accounting firms for sale. So I called on it and there were a couple of them in Phoenix. And there was one that was pretty interesting. They did a lot of consulting. And so I called the broker, talked to the owner, and the owner said, "Sounds like we've got, a real possibility here because you clearly know what you're talking about tax wise. I have high-end clientele, a lot of doctors and professionals and other high-end clientele, and do a lot of high-end tax strategy consulting." And she said, "But the first thing you have to do before we go any further is you have to read this book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad." And I said, "Never heard of it." I go, "What about it?" She goes, "Well, Robert Kiyosaki wrote it and he's become very famous. He was on Oprah recently. This was in 2001.
Wow.
And he was on Oprah recently. And so he's kind of blown up and he's one of the clients. And so you need to understand this." So I read the book. I'm going, "Oh, I get this." I mean, I grew up with that, right? I grew up with entrepreneurship. So Rich Dad Poor Dad was not like this big aha moment to me. But I'm going, wow, this he's right. I mean, this is exactly how it works. This good story. It's how it works. The next day, I mean, literally I'm reading, I just finished reading the book. I get another postcard from a buddy of mine, George Duck. And George says, "Just want to let you know, I just became the chief financial officer of the Rich Dad company." And I'm going, "You're kidding me." This is a good buddy of mine. And so I call him up. I said, "So tell me about this." So he starts telling me about it. Then I get a call from another friend of mine who's a life insurance agent. She goes, "Just want you to know, I'm a client of this practice that you're buying and they really need you. So I'm going to really push for this. I'm going to make sure that all the clients come over and they know how good you are." So everything aligned for this. And really it came down to, first of all, a bad partner that led to a good partner.
Yep.
Right. And second of all, a decision that instead of playing defense, reducing my staff, I played offense and added to the business. And that's how I met Robert. I like to tell people that I paid good money for Robert Kiyosaki. Best investment I ever made, by the way.
I'm guessing he's probably going, it was the best investment he makes on an ongoing basis, having you as a CPA.
So I didn't get to do all of his work right off the bat because he had an attorney that wanted to split the accounting work. He wanted me to do the business and the other firm to do the personal stuff. And he's talked about this publicly, so I can share this. But he got this audit, and I'm going, hey, I think this audit is bogus. I said, and this is in huge assessment. I mean, like millions of dollars. And so we actually got this assessment down to, I think, $56,000.
From millions of dollars down to 56,000.
Right. And then we got that money back the next year. So it was temporary
Loan to the government.
You say somebody $2 million. I mean, pretty soon they notice you, they pay attention. So we've had a great relationship. We learn from each other, but that's where it came from. I literally decided that we wanted to stay the same size. We didn't want to shrink.
Yep.
And by doing that, we happened upon Mr. Kiyosaki.
Wow. What's amazing about your story, it reminds me of a friend of mine. He was showing me these sort of like symbols and he was, and he goes, this one really speaks to me. And it was this, if you can imagine this line that was kind of went forward and then looped and looped and looped again, and then kind of went all over and then straightened out. And he goes, this is called in Buddhism, it's called unilome, and it means in terms of never straight, always forward. And what's so interesting to me about what you just were talking about is like, people could have been like, man, bad partnership, down and out, and kind of licked their wounds, but you always just kept falling forward. And I find that so interesting. I know you and I were talking in Arizona. We have some similar history in terms of in previous relationships of kind of always just keep moving forward. And I mean, have you always found that for you? And I'm curious not only for you, but as you've had kind of a front row seat for 30 plus years with entrepreneurs, that the ones who continue to progress and that the IRS continues to love because they continue to make a lot of money, is that what you find to be true? Like they're always moving forward, whether it's straight.
Well, our friend, our mutual friend Dan Sullivan says,
Yes.
you can't play defense while you're playing offense.
That's
Right. And, I've always grown up on the positive side. I live with rose colored glasses. I can't help it. And it hurts me from time to time. No question. There's no question I've lost money because of my rose colored glasses. And so it's good to have somebody on your team who's a little more critical. And actually my partner, Ann, we were partners for 24 years after that. And she had that critical, she would take the critical side of it because she knew I was always going to take the optimistic side of it. I remember when I was leaving my mission in Paris, my mission president, who was in charge of us, he sits me down. He says, so I'm going to write back home and, to the church leaders back in Salt Lake. He goes, what should I tell them? Do you have any like special skills or anything that can put you to use? And I said, well, I have a really good smile. And he goes, really? That's what you want me to tell them? And I'm going, well, yeah. And, it's like, so when I wrote Tax-Free Wealth, it's like taxes with a smile, right? I mean, it's like, how to make massive amounts of wealth by permanently reducing your tax. I mean, this is the positive side to taxes. And I'm going, if I can create the positive side to something that is inherently negative, I'd be the coroner with a smile on his face. I mean, that's who I would be. Right. So, well, you know what? Hey, they're going to a better place. I mean, death that's not all that bad, right? I mean, think about, they're feeding I mean, I'd come up with something. Um, and as tragic as paying taxes are, how much fun is it to get money back from the government? The first year I work with somebody, typically they see a pretty sizable refund check. And I always explain that, the fun in taxes, it's built into the word refund, right? I mean, just write it down and take a look. I mean, fun's right in the middle of refund. So there's really not a lot more fun than getting
No.
money back from the government, which is why people tend to overpay their taxes in the first place. They actually use it as a savings account. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because yes, it's an interest-free loan to the government, but man, what else, what were they going to do with that $2,000-$3,000 extra? And now they've got, some money saved for a vacation or whatever. And I think that's what makes my job fun, is that I get to see people when they go, wow, I did not believe that I could have this much more money in my pocket. When you consider taxes take anywhere from a third to half of your income, most people, third to half of your income. If you had that money back, and let's say you just invested it and it got you're the financial planner, you get a 7% return. That means every 10 years it doubles, right? So, okay. So I've got an extra $20,000, and 10 years from now, I've got an extra $40,000, right? And then 10 years later, I've got an extra $80,000. Well, that's $80,000 I wouldn't have had I paid that money to the government. And then do that every single year of your entire life. And you go, wait a minute. You mean I could save 20,000 because it's permanent, right? That's the key, is make it permanent. $20,000 every single year. Let's say I do that for 10 years. That's $200,000, and I'm going to double that and double that and double that, right? So now all of a sudden, I could have $1 million in retirement that came from the government. I didn't even have to put the money in. It just came from the government, because I did those things the government wanted me to do to reduce my taxes. I did, and that's all it is, right? It's just doing what the government wants you to do.
Yes.
And it's not looking for loopholes, not looking, don't cheat, please. Everybody, don't cheat on your taxes. That's not a way to sleep at night. And what happens though, is that all of a sudden, wow, it's this heavy burden, because tax by definition, if you look at the word tax in the dictionary, one of the definitions is it's a drag, right? It's you're taxing something, meaning you're putting a weight or a drag on it by taxing it. You can tax a person just by, putting a backpack on them. That taxes them, right? As they're hiking, is that heavy backpack.
Yes.
And so it taxes our ability to build wealth. It taxes our ability to be free. And why not lessen that load if we can, so that we're not taxed so high we can move faster.
I want to go back to your idea of asking questions. You talked about like the importance of asking questions, and I feel like what I'm getting from you today is that by asking questions, it's like in tennis, it's getting one more shot. Just get that next shot. What are the 3 questions that you find over 30 plus years that entrepreneurs don't ask that they should be asking?
Oh, well, I'm going to go to tax questions, right?
Perfect.
Before that is, the first question I think every entrepreneur asks is, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I getting up in the morning? Why am I doing this? Because we've got to be motivated. If we're not motivated, if we're not ambitious, then why are we doing it? This is why people retire. And remember, retire means take out of service, right? This is why we take all these people out of service when they turn 65 that could still be in service. And we do it because we say, well, because they're trying to get away from something called a job, right?
Yep.
Whereas entrepreneurs, you go, well, when are you going to retire, Tom? And I passed 65 a while back, and go, why would I stop doing something I love doing? Right. So, if once you get that question answered, then I think life becomes easier to begin with.
Yes.
I'll tell you my favorite tax question. My favorite tax question is, how do I make it deductible?
So that's every entrepreneur.
How do I make it deductible? Well, most people, they'll go to their accountant, they'll say, is this deductible? They'll hold up their, they'll hold up their coffee mug. They'll say, hey, is this deductible? I'm going, I have no idea if that's deductible to you. It's deductible to me. I don't know if it's deductible to you. Well, how'd you make it deductible? That's the right question, because it's all, as I say in Tax for Wealth, you want to change your tax, you have to change your facts. And so you make it deductible. I had a really interesting experience. I learned this lesson. This is that same trip in Santiago, Chile, actually. And the sponsor of the event was the Bentley Lamborghini dealer of Santiago. And we had this, the night before was so much fun. We had this, this big shindig, and I couldn't speak Spanish. So I found somebody who spoke French, and we spoke French together for an hour eating dinner together. Cause I didn't speak any Spanish. So, and she didn't speak any English. So we found a common language. But so on the side of the stage, on one side of the stage is a Bentley, and the other side of the stage is a green Lamborghini. And which Robert thought was so cool, because he had a Bentley and his wife Kim had a Lamborghini. So this was like perfect. So very first day, he says, Tom, I want you to tell them how to deduct a Bentley. I said, okay. So I got up and I went through, first, it was early in the morning, and I went through the rules for deducting an automobile. Lunchtime, I'm sitting with this guy, and he looks at me and he goes, just want you to know, said, really appreciate what you did this morning. Really good job. He goes, I'm a tax attorney in Santiago, and you can't do that here.
Ooh.
And I said, really? He says, yeah. He said, cars are considered a luxury and they're not deductible. I said, thank you. And I'm like, wow, I just told everybody how to do something they can't do. How fun is that? And so that evening, I'm telling Robert this story, and the other speakers, I'm telling them the story, and Robert just looks at me and goes, okay. Next morning, day 2, we're about to go on stage, and Robert turns to me and he goes, Tom, I want you to tell him today how to legally deduct a Bentley in Chile. And I'm going, and I said, okay. I'm like, I learned a long time ago with Robert, trust the process, magic will happen. And we get up later that day, and we walked through an example. Actually, it was his Porsche. We walked through how to deduct it, and in Chile, how to deduct the cost of that Bentley in Chile. And afterwards, and we took a very different approach to it. It was a really sideways approach. And but the attorney comes up to me and he goes, I never would have thought of doing it that way. It would absolutely work. And I'm going, it taught me a lesson, Ben, that anything can be deductible. Remembering that money is fungible. And so anything can be deductible. The cost of anything can be deductible. It's just, we have to think differently. We have to get out of those first 3 solutions and get into the 453rd solution or whatever it is. But there's always a way to do that. So really the question that I think, it's really not how do I make it deductible? I think there's a bigger question, which is, how do I do what I want to do? How do I do what I want to do and stay within the bounds of the law? And, legal, ethical, moral, right? How do I do what I want to do? Not, can I do it? I think that's a terrible, we get in so much, we limit ourselves so much when we say, can I do something? Or even what can I do? But how do I do what I want to do? But we first have to ask the question. So question number 1 is, what do I want to do? Right? So number 2 is, how do I do what I want to do? And I think the third question is, who do I need to do it? So we did I don't know if you remember when we were at the event last week.
Yep.
We did an exercise. Dan had us do an exercise, and it's talk about, about your luck, right? How lucky am I? How do I make my luck? And what I discovered was everything lucky in my life came from people.
Ooh.
It came from people followed by action. So so my partner blows up at me.
Yep.
I took action. Then I go find new people, my new partner, which then we take action, which we go take the action of we're going to acquire a CPA firm, which then I meet another person, Robert, who then gets me to write tax-free wealth. It just goes on and on. It's people followed by action. So I think that's by far the third, we have to start with the first two because we need to that's kind of the roots. And then I think the people maybe give us the wings.
That is incredible. And I'm so happy that you started this podcast off with talking about your mom and then telling the story being like, this is one solution, but there's 49,000 other solutions. And you can feel the echo of your childhood in this. It's not like what, how, right? And really at the end of the day, in terms of the why, which is pretty incredible. When you think about the entrepreneurs who come to you, because it's not just about it's not just about taxes, but it's also about helping them actually build the wealth. Can you talk through the steps that most entrepreneurs miss when they think about, because most of them just accept the fact that yep, I'm in 40-50% tax bracket and that's just what's going to be. And, at the end of the year, at the end of the year, I'm going to scramble to figure out in terms of how do I get something off? And we see this a lot with farmers, specifically manufacturers. Let's just buy a bunch of equipment, whether you actually need it or not. But what are the 3 steps do you think that most entrepreneurs are missing in the fact that it's causing them to miss out on that ability to compound an asset?
Mm-mm. So I'll go back to the who, right? I think that the worst thing an accountant can ever say to you, and if they say this one thing to you, you need to fire them, and do not wait to fire them, and then find somebody. Don't say, I'm going to find somebody and then fire them. No, you need to fire them. If they say this one thing, and that is, well, you made a lot of money. Aren't you glad? So that's why you're paying a lot of tax. What a horrible thing to say. Because what that says to me is the accountant is so small that they are, in fact, probably jealous of their client, that their client's making all this money. And what they're doing is, rather than seeing that as a problem, they're seeing it as well, this is great. You're paying all this tax. That's a good thing. I had a prospective client. He's now a client, but I had a prospective client come to me and he goes, I had a mentor. And this mentor told me, he goes, you know what? There's different types of millionaires. The first millionaire is the one who has $1 million in the bank. He says, so I got there and I thought, wow, I'm a millionaire. He said, the second one is somebody who's making $1 million a year. He goes, I got there. That's great. He says, and the third one is somebody who's paying $1 million in taxes. And I said, wait. I'm going, are you kidding me? Why would you ever want to pay $1 million in taxes? And in fact, he was about to have a tax bill that year of $970,000. And yes, I'm going, whoa, time out. There's no way you should be paying that kind of tax. Now that means he made a lot of money, right? And so most accountants would say, well, you did good, right? Wow, you have all this money left over. I mean, if you paid $1 million in tax, you made at least $3 million, right? I mean, $2-3 million. So, maybe in $4 million to pay $1 million in tax. I said, that's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous way to think. And I just, I don't mince words too much. And I said, first of all, let's see what we can do. So he hired us, and within when this was September, his tax return was due in October. I don't know what we found, but we found about, I think $150,000 of tax savings. So we found some tax savings. I said, here's what I'm going to tell you to do. You're going to do this, this, and this. And next year, let's see what your tax bill is. So he does. So my favorite clients are the entrepreneurs who take my advice.
The people and action.
That's right. People in action, right? You got to have me, you got to have the people, but you got to take the action. And he did. Next year, his tax was 0. Now that is a really uncommon situation, folks. That is not, that's not a normal situation. But he went from $1 million one year to 0 the next. But he had to take the action. He had to change his facts. He had to do some things he'd never done. By doing it, here's the best part of this. Not only did he save $1 million in taxes, but he actually made $10 million on the project. So he saved money by making money. And this is why Robert and I travel together, is because he says, well, look, you work for the asset. Well, if you work for the asset, you actually pay less tax. Buying assets reduces your taxes. If you earn income, you pay high taxes. If you buy assets, you pay low taxes. It's pretty simple. And so I think what entrepreneurs miss is, the first thing is they do need probably a better who. They need to, if somebody's telling you can't deduct this, or your taxes are high because you made a lot of income, get rid of that person. I mean, that person is pulling you down. They are costing you money. I had somebody tell me once, but I like my accountant. And I actually showed her that over 20 years, it was costing her $40 million. I mean, $4 million, sorry, $4 million over 20 years. She goes, I don't like my accountant that much. I'm going, good. So really, right? How much, really you like your accountant? How much do you like your accountant? You're willing to be $4 million short because of your accountant, but that's not atypical. I mean, that's $70,000 a year, by the way. That's $70,000 a year for 20 years. That's all that is, compounded at 10% interest, gets you to $4 million. Well, $70,000 for a lot of entrepreneurs, that's not a lot of money. I mean, they're paying way more than that in taxes. And so, I think you start with the who. I got to have a better who. But then I think that the other thing that entrepreneurs really miss is they don't get the education. They think that, well, I'm just going to turn this over to my who. And that's a huge mistake. You can't. I cannot change your taxes. I can tell you what taxes to change, what you need to do, but you actually have to do it. Okay. I cannot do that for you. I don't manage your money. I'm not in charge of that. You have to actually take the steps to do it. One of the things I love about your wife, Jenna, is that I know right away that she is absolutely going to be on it. She's going to do it. And so that's, to me, that's what makes a great client, because I like to see clients. I get my joy out of clients' success, and they don't have success unless they take the action. And I have clients who said, well, I had somebody say, well, you told me all these things, but Mike, my accountant, told me I couldn't do it. So I didn't do it. So your advice was terrible. I'm going, wait a minute. I told you exactly what to do. And had you done it, you'd have been successful, but you listened to this bozo over here instead, and you didn't take the action. Okay. And the bozo told you that because they didn't understand it. So this is why you have to understand, why is it? So I want everybody to understand why. That's why I wrote Tax-Free Wealth. That's why I wrote Win-Win Wealth. Both of them is to, why does it work the way it does? Once you understand why, it's a different animal. And so you have to take the action. You have to be willing to take the action. But I think the third thing is you have to take a very holistic view. I've been learning a lot recently about functional medicine and about how you look at the whole body and the spirit. And, we've got some people in our mastermind group that are functional medicine people. And the same thing is true for, I think, wealth, and especially the tax part of it, is that so as I was explaining to you and Jenna yesterday, there's really 3 questions you have to ask. How do you make your money? What are you going to do with your money? What are you going to do with your money when you die? And those 3 questions are kind of the essence of all good tax planning. What people forget is that what I'm going to do with my money when I die might have an impact on how much tax I pay today. Or what I'm going to do with my money next year has an impact on how much tax I'm going to pay next year. How do I, how I make my money is important. It's not nearly as important as what I do with my money, but it is important because, entrepreneurs have a huge advantage in the tax law over employees. I don't know if you know this, but prior to 1944, employees weren't taxed at all. There was no tax on wages prior to 1944. And FDR changed that because he wanted federal employees to be taxed. And in order to have federal employees taxed, they had to have everybody be taxed because we have this little equal protection clause in the Constitution. So so that was the first time employees were taxed at all. Now employees pay most of the taxes are paid by employees, and high paid employees especially pay an enormous amount of taxes. Entrepreneurs, they have a whole different set of rules. It's like, okay, so I'm playing the tax game and there's one set of rules for employees and a different set of rules for entrepreneurs. And that is true. There is a completely different set of rules for entrepreneurs. And so once you kind of go, oh, okay. And then you go, okay. And there's different rules depending on what you're going to do with your money. So if you're going to put your money in real estate, there's a different set of rules than if you're going to put your money in the stock market. And there's a different set of rules if you're going to put it into business or energy or agriculture. Wherever you're going to put your money, there's a different set of rules for each asset class. And, people get overwhelmed with how complicated the tax law is, and it is extraordinarily complex. But there's a lot of simplicity to the basics of it. And if you understand why, so why is that? So for example, why do farmers pay the least amount of tax? Because they do. They pay the least amount of tax in this country and every other country. Why? Well, because what do we need more than anything else? Food. Okay. So, and it's a national security issue. It's a having a peaceful constituency issue, right? People rise up. They're hungry. They're going to rebel, right? So they need food. You cannot starve them. Don't, it's not let them eat cake. Then you get in trouble, right? You lose your head over that. And so, food. What is real estate? Well, housing. We got to have housing over us. Okay. Well, we have a housing crisis right now, right? We have all these homeless people and all sorts of reasons for that. But the reality is that if I now build a house for somebody else to live in, I get more tax benefits than I build one for myself to live in. Well, why is that? Well, because, maybe the government wants me to build that house, right? So they're going to say, I'm going to help you with that by giving you a tax break. That's how the government invests with you. They give you a tax break. So I'm going to put some money in, you put some money in. Together, we'll do this. You do all the work, we'll take 40% of the income. It's a pretty good deal for the government. But on the front end, they'll give you a 40% tax break, right? So you get 40% up front so that you pay back 40% later. That's kind of the idea. Now, you can actually turn that on its head and get the 40% up front and never pay the 40% back. But that's a different, that's a whole different story. Well, we'll have to do that separately. I just think that, once we start looking at a much bigger picture, which I never see tax people do, they don't look at a big enough picture. They just, nobody, if you look at somebody who's super healthy, they focus on their health in everything they do. They don't put something in their mouth unless it's good for them. They don't, they don't just sit around. They do so many things. These great athletes, they're doing so many things to get that healthy and that strong. Then the question is, well, how healthy and strong do you want to be financially? Right. And if you're not covering your tax side of it, you're never going to be as healthy and strong as you could be.
Man, you're like the Phil Jackson, John Wooden of taxes.
I've not had that comparison before. Thank you.
But what I'm realizing is that your relentless pursuit of why, and like in the atomic habit of 1% every year, just understanding 1% more, 1% more, is compounded to the fact that is that you're able to turn the frown upside down to making taxes fun again. And I think that that is absolutely fascinating. Why do you feel like that most accountants' aperture is so zoomed in and and they don't have the global? Is this an education problem? Is this actually that they're uh, that they just maybe the type of people who go into the industry? Like what is it?
Again, let's ask the question why. Why does somebody get into accounting? They probably get into accounting because they like numbers, they like structure, they like predictability, right? That's a very fairly common for people. I came into the tax world. I'm a very right-brained person. I, my first wife was a music teacher. So you think, wow, she's a left brain. I'm going, we took a right brain, left brain test. I'm way more right brain than she was. And, and, uh, and what that does for me is it allows me to think laterally
Hmm.
instead of just in a straight line, right? The tax law um, is not a straight line by any means. There are like 7 different definitions of child in the tax law. So you can't say, well, and the question I would ask, well, okay, so which definition do I want? So I'll change my fact so I get the definition that works for me, right? As for child, or where is it applicable? I think that we start looking at a much broader view of life and the law. And the other thing is I love studying the law. I think it's fascinating. It is, I mean, my wife's also a CPA, and we totally nerd out on this stuff. I mean, we are like having tax discussions every morning for breakfast and every evening for dinner. And, and we just think it's fun. It's fun for her differently. For her, it's a puzzle. For me, it's a mystery, right? It's like, okay, how can I do something different? How could I do something that's never been done before? Right? How can I connect dots that have never been connected? Because there are all these dots to be connected. And the challenge is that if you're a linear processor, if your brain is a linear processor, left side of your brain, right? Linear processor, then it's very hard to connect dots that lie outside that straight line. And that's why, I mean, I don't blame accountants. I mean, they need a system. They're really good at following one. So of course, what I decided was, well, I'll just create the system, right? And so I'll take all that nonlinear stuff to put it into a linear form so that accountants can follow it. And so now we have a franchise of accountants who follow that. And the idea is that not everybody's going to be that kind of a thinker. So relying on a person, I think, is always a mistake. I think you really you want to rely on a system, not a person, because the system, is less likely to fail you
Yes.
than a person. I mean, there are things I don't know, but if I have a system for it, that's where AI, I think, is going to be so magical. Is it doesn't have it hasn't read 100 books. It's read 100 million books, right? AI has, and so it doesn't have those same limitations. It can get to the 50,000th answer to the question because it's seen so much, and it's the most non-linear technology we've ever had. AI it's completely nonlinear. And that's why you need algorithms. That's why you need all the technology you need for it, because it's nonlinear. Our brains are naturally, I think, nonlinear, but I think that we're taught in school, we're rewarded for linear thinking.
Yes.
That's where the reward is. That's how you get good grades on math. Now, kids, they're changing some of this in schools right now. I have grandkids. I have a 7-year-old and 9-year-old grandchild, and my 9-year-old granddaughter, she's doing her homework and her mom's helping her. She goes, "Mama, you don't understand how to do the math. You need to learn how to do math." My daughter goes, "No, you need to learn how to do math. I already did that. I'm good. Thank you very much." But we were taught, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, it was very much, okay, learn this, times table, multiplication tables. This is kind of the thought process. I remember in college, I had this accounting class, and um, I get my test scores back for the final, and I got a C on the final. I'm going, there's no way. There's no way. I knew this stuff. I had it. I'd studied hard. I knew there's no way I got a C. So I go up to the professor and I said, can we go through this exam? And he goes, okay. And I said, so I see this one problem you gave me 0 for, and yet I got the answer right. I'm not understanding. He goes, well, I had a grader do it, and you got points for every step along the way. And I said, well, take a look at the way I did it. And is the way I did it a valid way to do it? And he goes, yeah. And he gave me the A. And I'm going, so that's the challenge, is that if we think that there's one way to do it, we're missing that we could come at a different way. One of the things that I'm seeing my grandson, he's a math whiz. He's absolutely a math genius. And he thinks about numbers the way I do. He's a very nonlinear thinker. And so math to him, you give him a math problem and he will give you the answer. It's like, Rain Man type. I mean, he will give you the answer, and he'll oh, let's double. Let's just take numbers and double them. And you start with 3, and then it's 6, and then it's 12, and he'll go all the way up into a billion. I mean, he loves this stuff, but he's just looking at it differently. And that's the thing, is we really have to understand that there are different ways to look at things. There are different ways to get to the solution. And we need to find those systems and those people, that combination, where we can get to the solution that works for us. So, when I design education, which is what I did when I was in the national office of Ernst & Young, when I design education, I want it to work for somebody who's verbal, somebody who's visual, somebody who's tactile, somebody who, wants a short summary, somebody who, wants to draw pictures. I want it to work for everybody, because we all learn differently. And one of the challenges that we tend to have growing up is we tend to learn a certain way of learning. And that way I could figure it out because I could see through it. I was fortunate that I could see through what they were doing. I'm going, okay, I get how you're doing it. I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it a different way. And because I can get to my answer faster than you can get to your answer. And so, and then I had to fight with the teachers and say, hey, I got the right answer. What's the problem here? Just because I didn't do it the way your book taught you how to do it. But I think there's just a bigger lesson, Ben, for everybody, and especially entrepreneurs. We all limit ourselves to some extent.
Yes.
We give ourselves a ceiling, which is why I think the most important thing we do as entrepreneurs is personal development, so that we can break out of that box or that ceiling. But once we understand, you're right. My mother, obviously the biggest influence on my life. And
it's incredible.
She's like, you know what? There's always a solution, and the solution may be to say no. The solution may be to dump it. You tried it, didn't work, move on. But there's always a solution. So don't worry about it.
Your story speaks so much to me in terms of what my journey through the conventional education system was, and I think that's probably why you love entrepreneurs so much. It's so incredible to me that you have built all these first principles because you realize that the alchemy is in the actual questions. And you've created these repeatable sets of questions that allow you to not be linear, but allow you to actually be lateral, and even though you're moving forward. And I think I think that's like really phenomenal. I'm always, when you talk about the solution, I'm always, I was thinking about the Thomas Edison example, right? He found 10,000 ways to not create a light bulb. But, I think he must have been so incredibly disappointed in the fact that he actually found, that's how I hear that story, is going, he found it, but I don't, yeah. And now what? And I think that one of the joys of being an entrepreneur is that I never want to arrive. Our friend Lee Brower says the enemy of thriving is arriving. And I think And I'm curious from your perspective, right? Like you continually find these new solutions, and thankfully for you, it's the law is always changing. The tax code is always changing. It's like shifting sands, right? I think of currents coming in and sandbars. Oh, there wasn't a sandbar here. If we're sitting here 5, 10 years from now, what would you be saying then that we should be thinking about now?
Oh, it's all to me. How do we get how do we get more consistency in our results? I think that's the key. And um, so what the law, the principles of the law don't change much. They really don't. And so from that standpoint, um, people say, well, what about what happens if there's a flat tax? I'm going, you can dream all you want about a flat tax, but there's no politician that ever once voluntarily gave up power. And that's what they would be doing with the flat tax. So it's not going to happen. So I'm like, that's off the table for me. That's why would I waste my time thinking about something that's never going to happen? So instead, why don't we think about, okay, what could happen, and not just what could happen, but how do I make sure that whatever I'm doing is impervious to whatever could happen? And some of that is, frankly, understanding why it works the way it does. And so for me, I'm more interested. My study is really learning. That is my study. And I've just taken the most complex subject on earth, tax, and figured that's a really good place to start. If I can make taxes fun, easy, and understandable, everything else is piece of cake, right? Compared to that. And so once you understand, so for me, the challenge is, make it simple and make it so that it's simple, repeatable, people can do it, and they don't have to think about it. Because wouldn't it be cool if you never had to worry about your taxes ever again? Wouldn't that be cool? That was not an issue for you. Think about how much energy that frees up for you to do what you really want to do. Oh, I don't have to worry about taxes. Then the next piece is, well, wait a minute. What if I didn't even have to worry about money? What if I had my wealth strategy so clear and the team around me so good? I don't really have to worry about it. I mean, I have to think about it. Don't get me wrong. I have to pay attention, but I don't have to worry about it. It's not a weight. It's actually a joy to go, hey, wow, cool. Look, I made money. Hey, cool. I didn't pay taxes on that money. Wow, this is kind of fun. And so then it's really about, okay, now how do I serve the people that I want to serve the way I want to serve them? Instead of, I think the job of the CPA is to take the burden off of the entrepreneur, right? Our job is to make your job easier. And we do that by, analysis, by, helping you reduce taxes, but analyzing what's going on. That's what CPAs are really good at. We're really good at analysis. And so once we, you start with that good set of books, right? You have a good set of records, and now we can analyze it. And now you've got a system to analyze it. Now, how can we make it simple so that I understand how to do it? And what can I do just every single day? And it just becomes part of who I am. And so I can instead focus on what matters. And that's the goal. My goal in life is let's make it so easy that you have arrived. I want you to arrive because I don't want you to worry about it. I don't want you to be thinking about it. I want you to get to the point where this is just what we do. We use this credit card for this business. We use this credit card for that business. These are the habits. Talk about atomic habits, right? Here's the habits that I do every single day. I go to my home office in the morning. I come to my home office at night. And that way I don't have the commute for tax purposes as my kitchen to my home office. It's not from my home office it's not from my kitchen to, my outside office. It's from my kitchen to my home office. Now all of my automobile is all of a sudden deductible, right? Because I have a home office. And I'm just going, it just becomes part of who you are. So you don't have to think about it, and you can concentrate on those things that make a difference in your world and the world of your customers.
Tom, you are a gift to this world, and especially to the entrepreneurs. And my beginning to starting to work with you, Jenna and I are starting to work with you. I mean, it's really clear. This conversation is just been so fascinating because it's not just the tax strategies. What makes it so fascinating is they have all these first principles that you're basing all of this off of. So, the audience, if they want to like read one of your books, where do they go to find one of your books? And how many books do you have out there? And if you were to rank them, ooh, we'll do this. Rank them like they're your children. Which one's your favorite? Put top three.
Oh, well, my favorite is going to be tax-free wealth. You're for most parents, their first child is always their favorite, right? It's true.
Don't tell my sister that.
It's true. Actually, my mother definitely thought her oldest son was definitely her favorite. I'm the youngest, just to be clear. Um, but it really, to me, I wrote the books for different reasons. Tax-free wealth is all about, I want to understand how to reduce my taxes. Great, tax-free wealth. But if you want to understand how do I invest in order to make more money while paying less taxes and doing good in the world, you read the win-win wealth strategy, because that's what it's about. It's a win for you. It's a win for the government. And that's actually, you want to understand how do tax laws really work around the world? Because we actually looked at 15 different countries and how the tax laws, the different incentives work in the different countries, and what really are the top incentives. And, it's so basically, think of tax-free wealth as how do I make my money, and win-win wealth as what do I do with my money, right? I have another book in mind, which is what do I do with my money when I die, right? So that will be another book that will come out in probably a couple of years. So those are the two. I wrote a book with Robert called Why the Rich Are Getting Richer, which I was fascinating to write with him as kind of his helper on that one. And he did. I have credit. It's really small print. You have to get a magnifying glass out to actually see. But my name is on the cover of that book. But it's just really small. He did most of the work. And I've contributed a number of his other books. But tax-free wealth is the one that the average person, you really want to get just to understand how the tax law works. And I'd pick up tax-free wealth, and that's in every bookstore on earth.
And if people want to find you, what are your socials in terms of if they want to follow you in terms of content you're creating, and if they want to actually get in contact with you because they're like, I need a Tom in my life, where do they find you?
My favorite place to learn is YouTube. So we do a lot on YouTube. Podcasts, as you mentioned earlier, thank you, is the Wealth Ability Show. And I love doing that. I get to do that every week. And a very practical show. So it's very practical information. We actually have two websites because we have two different things we do. One is we have a franchise of tax advisors, and that's tfwadvisors.us. So that's as in tax-free wealth advisors. And then we have our education, which is wealthability.com. So either place is good. And you want the education, go to Wealthability. If you want an advisor, go to TFW.
Tom, I'm going to give you the last word. What is the thing that you would have your mom echo out into the podcast universe? What's the thought that you'd like to leave the audience with?
Don't ever be constrained with boundaries. There's always something else that could be done. There's always a solution. We just haven't found it yet. And the opportunities. I always wonder why people say, I don't know, I'm bored. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going, how can you possibly be bored in this world? It's such a fascinating world. And there's so many fascinating people. I'm going, take a trip, go to Europe, go to China, go to South America, go somewhere. I mean, I've been all those places, and they're all so fascinating because the people are so interesting, and they're different and they're the same all at the same time. And the last thing I'd say is don't forget the who, right? We do have to understand why. But once we understand why, then there's probably some who out there that can help us.
Yeah. And then don't forget action.
That's right. The who followed by the action.
Who followed by the action. Tom, thanks so much for coming on the Max Life podcast. It's been an absolute joy, and looking forward to many more conversations.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you for listening. A big thanks to Elation Lab for the production and creative design. Remember to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Keep listening for more Max Life.